In this video, I'm going to go over excess per risk and how to calculate the answer to the practice problem, which will help you calculate problems 5 and 6 of the reinsurance problem set. So let me start by just reading the question. Given the following historical data on We Protect You Insurance Company, answer these questions. Number 1, assuming an XPR cover of $75,000 excess of $75,000 UNL, UNL is just ultimate net loss, and it's the same in this case as the subject loss. So we're talking about these numbers here. With pro rata LAE, here is the subject LAE. What are the recoveries in years 1, 2, and 3? I'll show you how to calculate pro rata LAE. And then in the next question, I'll show you how to calculate excess LAE. What I want to do, though, is to bring up an Excel spreadsheet here, because it'll get difficult to read my writing with this pen. I already don't have the best handwriting, but it makes it a lot worse with the Smartboard ink pen. So I'll write some, but I'll type in a lot as well. When I pull up the pen, it does take away the Excel spreadsheet. But I want to make myself a chart that shows how this treaty works. It is a 75 excess of 75, which is how it's usually abbreviated in the industry. So I have a $75,000 retention and a $75,000 cover. The top of that cover is going to be at $150,000, which tells me that for a loss that is $152,000, I'm probably getting a little bit out of the screen here. Let me write it again. That the cedent is going to pay the $75,000. The reinsurer is going to pay $75,000 because it blows through, so-called, the entire cover. And then this last $2,000 here is also going to be paid for by the cedent. So the cedent's total loss is $77,000, and they will recover $75,000 from the reinsurer. So let's put these numbers in the spreadsheet. And the way that I work this problem is to make a chart for myself. We'll start with year 1. And we'll label the first column here subject loss and subject LAE for the second column. And those are just the given numbers. So that's 75,000, 90,000, 45,000, 80,000, 125,000, 75,000. And then for subject LAE, 15,000, 25,000, 5,000, 12,000, 20,000, and 6,000. Our next column will be the XPR recovery, or in other words, the recovery from the treaty. And let me label each one of these columns 1, 2, and 3. Then our next column is actually going to be the percentage recovered. And the next column will be the LAE recovery. And the last column here will be the total recovery. So in order to calculate the XPR recovery, we simply apply this $75,000 loss to our treaty. Let me go back to our chart. It's a $75,000 loss, so it goes right up to the treaty, but it doesn't actually trigger the treaty. So for our first loss, the recovery is 0. For the second loss, which is a $90,000 loss, the recovery is going to be 90,000 minus 75,000, or 15,000. 90 here. And while we're at this, let's look at our third and fourth loss. Our third loss doesn't exceed the retention, and our fourth loss of 80,000 only goes into the retention by 5,000. So 80,000 here, that's only a $5,000 recovery from the reinsurer. So let's put those numbers in. We had 15,000, 0, and then 5,000. What about our 125,000? So it's 125,000 minus 75,000. It does not go over the $150,000 attachment point past the reinsurance coverage. And so that's 50,000. Another way we could check that is if we come up with a number over 75,000, since the cover is only 75,000, that would tell us that we need to max it out at 75. And then our last loss is again 75,000, so that's a 0 recovery. The percentage recovery is simply going to be column 3 divided by column 1. In other words, it's the recovery from the reinsurance contract divided by the total subject loss. So I'm just going to write in plus column 3 here, or D6, divided by 75,000. And of course, that's 0. And then I'm going to copy this down. In your answer, you will round to the nearest 1%. So if you are doing this in Excel, it's fine to do it without a decimal point. However, be careful on this. I will allow you to turn it in Excel, but you do need to be able to work these problems by hand. The next column is the LAE recovery, which is simply column 4, the column you just calculated, times the LAE, which is column 2. And I'm going to abbreviate that too. So column 4 times column 2. And of course, this first one is 0 because there was no recovery from the XPR. And then we'll copy this formula down. So our total recovery is simply column 5 plus column 3. And again, I'm going to copy this down. Then we need to total this column. So I'm simply going to hit the sum here. And that gives us 82,917. But the question asks for the loss cost. And so we need to divide the total loss recovery by $15 million in the first year because that's the subject premium. What this question is asking for is the loss cost of the recoveries. So it's really the reinsurer's loss cost or loss ratio. Often in the industry, the term loss ratio is just expressed as loss cost. It might actually be expressed as a dollar amount like 82,917, but more often than not, you'd express it as a percentage of premium. So let's calculate that. Plus 82,917 divided by 15 million, which is the subject premium, and that gives us 0.553%. Now, all we really have to do is copy these formulas in this chart and then change the numbers appropriately to reflect year 2. So let's enter year 2 losses. 155, 110, 180, 125, 155, and 145. And our subject LAE is given as 10,000, 5,000, 10,000, 30,000, 5,000, and 10,000. Now we do have to figure out what our recovery is because we didn't do this as a formula since it might go over the 150. Well, in this case, the first subject loss of 155 does exceed our 150 attachment point by $5,000. So we know that our recovery maxes out at 75,000, and automatically that calculates the LAE recovery percentage of 48% for us, and the LAE recovery of 4,839, and the total recovery of 79,839. This loss cost won't be correct until we finish. The next loss was 110,000, so 110,000, which does not exceed 150, but minus the retention of 75,000 is 35,000, and 180,000 does exceed the 150. So we know that we're going to max out at 75,000. The 125 here does not exceed the coverage, and so we know it's going to be 125,000 minus 75,000 or 50,000. And then our next loss of 155,000 does exceed the attachment point. So it's going to cap out at 75,000. And last, 145,000 does not exceed the attachment point. So we can just do 145 minus 75,000 and that's $70,000. Again, all of our LAE recoveries are automatically calculated because they were in the formula. And our total reinsurance recovery is $409,843. But don't forget that we have a different subject premium now. So let's go back to our calculation. And instead of being divided by 15 million, it's divided by 19 million. And so our loss cost is 2.157. Okay, let's do year 3 real quick. And year 3 has one less loss. We'll delete this row here. And most of the year 3 losses don't even trigger the treaty. So this one is 0 because it doesn't exceed the $75,000 retention. This is 5,000, 0, 0, and 15,000. So again, all of this is already calculated for us, but we do need to divide by the correct subject premium, which is 18 million, giving us a loss cost of 0.117. Now we need to look at how to calculate the recoveries on an excess LAE basis instead of pro rata basis. So let's go over that. When you're calculating on an excess LAE basis, and I'm going to move the Excel spreadsheet a little more into the screen, we're just going to create another column here in our spreadsheet because we're going to use the same numbers we used before. We really just need 2 more columns here. We'll call them column 7 and column 8. Column 7 is going to be our total loss column, and then column 8 will be our total recovery column. I'm going to also make note that this is on an excess LAE basis. So instead of calculating the percentage of the loss recovery and then multiplying that by the LAE, we are going to treat the LAE here as if it is just part of the loss and then apply the treaty. So I'll say that again. We're just simply taking the subject LAE, adding it to the loss, and then applying the treaty to the total. So we simply add column 1 plus column 2, which is the subject loss plus the subject LAE, and then we'll copy this down, and then we'll apply that total to the treaty. So none of these exceed our 150,000. By now I hope you've sort of caught on to how to apply the treaty. So we're just going to subtract the 75,000. For these two, that works. Now, we don't want a negative number, so we'll just put 0 here because it doesn't exceed the retention. And then I'm going to copy these in these last 3 losses. And that is going to give us our total recovery. It's pretty simple, 148,000. We can actually just copy this over because this is the total recovery divided by the $15 million of subject premium. And now I'm just going to copy this formula here. I will have to fix a couple things here. Now, this is really important that you note this. The biggest mistake that people tend to make in this problem is they forget that there is a coverage limit on what the reinsurer will pay. So if you see 90,000, you know that's wrong because it exceeds what the reinsurer will pay. So you just need to type in 75,000. This is correct of 40,000, and I had typed in 0 above because the loss didn't exceed the retention. And if we look at this loss, it actually blows through the cover. So it's going to give us a number that's well in excess of our 75,000. So we're just going to type in 75,000. And again, 80,000 exceeds our treaty. So we're going to type in 75,000. Same here. These are large losses. And when you add in the LAE, it usually takes it right through the treaty, except in that one case. And so our total recovery is $415,000, giving the reinsurer a loss cost of 2.7. Then lastly, let's copy this in and then make our corrections as needed. Let's just use our formula. I'm going to copy it from here. And then we have a negative, so we know to type in 0. Because the cedent is not going to give money to the reinsurer for a loss. And so our total recovery is 70,000. And we do have to change this to 18. And this one should actually be 19. to give us our correct loss costs, because again, this is the subject premium of 19, and this was the subject premium here of 18 million. And these are our answers. But we do have another question, so let's look at it. It says, for each year, make note of which approach to calculating the reinsurer's LAE is more cost effective, i.e. cheaper to the cedent. So cheaper to the cedent is actually going to mean that the reinsurer pays more. Or another way of thinking about it is cheaper to the cedent means the cedent gets a larger recovery. We can actually just look at the recoveries, the total recoveries, or we can compare the loss cost. So in every case, in the practice problem here, the reinsurer pays more when you have excess LAE, when you have losses on an excess LAE basis, because 148,000 is greater than 82,917, 415 is slightly bigger than 409,843, and 70,000 is of course bigger than 21,125. The only time that you're going to find LAE on a pro rata basis being better than on an excess of loss basis is when you have maybe a small retention, like maybe a 75,000 excess of 25. And that means that the reinsurer might pay a significant percentage of the subject loss. But in this case, because the 75 excess of 75 means that the maximum the reinsurer would pay is going to be 50% of the loss. And we didn't have many of those. This was the closest here in terms of the percentage of recovery. So the only time that the percentage LAE is going to be better for the cedent, i.e. result in higher loss recoveries, is really when you have, say, a $25,000 retention and a $75,000 coverage, and you have losses that are maybe right here, and when you have the LAE added, it's just going to push the LAE through the cover. But if it's a percentage and you have a significant percentage of the loss being covered by the reinsurer, multiplying that by the LAE will mean that the reinsurer pays a higher portion of the LAE. And you'll see those in the problems. I don't want to give it all away, but I do want you to look for that. There's at least one of those situations. So the answer here is, for each year, make note of which approach to calculating the reinsurer's LAE is more cost effective, and in every case, for the cedent, the excess LAE is more cost effective. And as I said, you can do this in Excel, but just make sure that you know how to do it by hand.